Begin the current Daf Mesechta Yevamos Daf Gimel. Begin 5 lines down at the top of the Yemen, where we continue the discussion of the previous Daf, which the Gemara is in the middle of discussing the reasoning for the order of these 15 women, which is the title of the opening parak of Mesechta Yevamos, Chamesha Sinashim, the 15 women that are arayas, that are going to be a problem for the mitzvah Yibum, that they exempt themselves and their tzaras and tzaras say, and the Sefer Olam. What was the reason for the order of those 15 women? Shares corresponds because of Mechazkel. So anytime Daf Chaim, Christian is joining us for today's Daf. Some things we're going to discuss in today's Daf are, as we said, the reasoning for the specific order of the 15 Isuri Erva as applied to the mitzvah Yibum. We can bring the sources of the Isuri Erva, not per se of the arayos themselves, because most of them are explicit in the Torah, but the source that the Isuri Erva would be a problem for doing Yibum with our. Some of the important concepts are Yibum, which obviously is the theme of this whole Masechta, which is when a person dies without any children, his brother has a mitzvah to marry the almana, the widow. Chalitza is if he doesn't want to, it's like a type of a divorce proceeding. Sarah is the co-wife because she is a tsar, she's a challenge, she's a pain for her co-wife. Saita is the suspected adulterous woman who is secluded with a man after she was warned not to. Asa Seba Duchalaisa says the concept that a positive commandment could go ahead and override a negative prohibition. So to begin the current daf, first quick reminder from what we started the Gemara in the previous daf. The Gemara was asking the question, the reasoning for the specific order of the 15 Isuri ever. The Gemara had two possible criteria. Either Tana Chumri Chumri Naka, that we were going to first say the most stringent case, and the Gemara had a problem with that because first of all, that Sreifa, even if you can tell me that's Mochamer and that's why he's saying it first, but then you should have said a specific order of after Sreifa than those of Skila, and it's not in that order. So then the Gemara said, Kivan the Asa Midrasha Chavivale. The Gemara says, okay, it's first because of a drasha. That is because all these Surya Arayas, the primary Isser is written explicitly in the Torah. But Bitai, which is the first one, is Iker Isur Midrash. Why is that? So generally a man's daughter is going to be his wife's daughter, because generally Avram and Sarah are married and they have a daughter, so that's going to be his daughter and his wife's daughter. But you could technically have your Bitai and Basishte, which are two different cases in the Mishnah, as separate, right? Because Avram could have violated a woman and had a daughter that's Bitam on the Sasai unrelated to his wife Sarah, and Sarah could have had a daughter from a previous marriage. So Bita and Bas Ishta, although usually it's the same girl, but it could be technically from two different relationships. Now, as we mentioned this from the previous daf, which is from the top of the summit, that in Parshas Achrei Mos, when it talks about the Azharas, the prohibition, Bita is not explicit in the Torah. It only says Bas Benoy and Bas Bita. It says Ervas Bas Bintchoy, Bas Bitcho, Leisigal Ervascha, Ervasn Ki Ervascha Heina. It's even if it's Ma'anusasa, it doesn't say anything about a wife, but it only says granddaughter, whether from his son or his daughter. In contrast, Bas Ishtoi is together with Bas Bana and Bas Bita, because it says in the pasuk, Erbas Isho Bita, it says her and her daughter, Leisagala, as Bas Bana as Bas Bita, Leisika, Legal Sarvasa. Now, but there's a Gzera Shava of Heina Heina. If you see the highlight of the word Heina on the right side, in that pasuk where it doesn't mention daughter, which is Bitam and Nusasai, we learn out from Heina that it says by Bas Ishtai. Which just like over there, that Bas Bita is like Bas Bita, so to over here, that the Bita is going to be like Bas Bita. That's how we know that's Hara. And the punishment of Sreifa we know because it talks about by Chamaisai, Ve'esha Sheikar Has Isha Ves Ima Zimahi Be'eshis Sreifu. So we see the word Zima indicates Sreifa, and it says Zima by Bas Ishtai. So therefore we know that the Sreif over there, and Heina tells us, well, whatever's by Bas Ishta is going to be by Bita. So Bita Manusasa, we know, which were the last words we said from the previous daf, that there's going to be an erva of Bita, and that it's going to have Sreifa from Gzeir Shabbat of Heina and Zima. Now, the problem is that this Gemara continues now. 5 lines down the top of the Yomim. Hashda Amr, but now that you're telling me, they call Milsa Da'asim Midrash Chavivile. You tell me that why did we start off the list of 15 with Bitai? Oh, because Bitai is a drasha. We don't know. It doesn't say in the Torah that a man would be forbidden to have an intimate relationship with his daughter, Ma'anusasa. It doesn't say anywhere. It's from a drasha, which Heina Zima. Oh, so that's why we said it first. Okay, if that's the case, then listen to Lachis. Then why did you say his wife's sister, the last of the 15? Because, as we're going to explain later on, regarding exempting these 15 arayas from Yibum, we actually learned it off Machaisisha. That's the most explicit. Meaning, regarding these two elements of Drasha that we're talking about over here, the actual Erev itself, and the fact that it's exempt from the mitzvah of Yibum. That you exempt from Yibum, how do we know that? Eishes Ach you let, which is also an Erva for Yibum. So maybe you let also a Bitoi also for Erva. No, we learn it from Achai Sisha. We will shortly show you that a wife's sister is forbidden even in the situation of Yibum. And we learn all the rayos from there also. So then that's the most explicit. So why is that not the last one? If you tell me that you want to say the drashas first because you like it, because it's chaviv, because wow, you had to expound it to get to it, so why is not Achai Sisha last? So the Gemara says, good question, but I did the Arba Isach Vasa. But once we were talking about the prohibitions of sisterhood, of siblings, so Tana Aches Ishtay. So therefore we said Aches Ishtay too. Really we would put it last because it's the most explicit. But as some of the cases, Aches Ishtay, Me'imai, there are certain cases that talk about siblings that as ervas. So therefore we said Aches Ishtay after that, but really we would have it last. But then says Gemara, well, no, I still have that difficult. But Lasani Lahai Bava, but you should say that whole category of Achvasa, of the siblings, you should say Libsaif, and you should have Kalasai, the daughter-in-law, before his sister, so that he could have a Ches Isha at the end. If you're telling me that the order of the Mishnah is based on what's less explicit to the more explicit, you should have made sure to put that category last. So Ella rather says the Gemara, now this is where the Gemara says the conclusion of what's the order of the Mishnah. You're right. The Tana of the Mishnah, Korvi Nokan. Those that are closer to the person, those are the ones that are said first as arayis that are forbidden in the midst of Yibum, as the Gemara explains. Tana Bito Yobas Bito Yobas Benoy. The first three mentioned, and if you'll see now, you look back in the Mishnah, it's really categories of three primarily, starting off the beginning, 3, 6, 9, 12, moving ahead to what are the arayis we mentioned. Those are the Kreve Atzmai. Those are relatives related to his own self. And there's no one closer than that, because as Taisa points out, even though some of them are sisters, but we know the concept of bro kar davua, we know that a child is considered like a part of the parent. The closest three arayas to the individual, that if they're married to his brother to be forbidden for Yibum, are his daughter, his daughter's daughter, and his son's daughter, because they're relatives from himself. Now, those are the first three mentioned in the Mishnah. The I did the Tanashal Shleisha Daris Lamata the day. Once we mentioned 3 generations coming down from him, so then Tanana Mishleisha Daris Lamata the dust. And then we said 3 generations coming down from her, from his wife. And as Rashi points out, even though those are not really his own relationships, but still, once we're talking about 3 generations down from him, we mentioned then 3 generations down from her, which was Bas Ishtoi, Bas Bena, and Bas Bita. I did the Tanish Leisha Daris Lamata the da. Once we're mentioning 3 generations coming down from her, Tanish Leisha Daris Lamala did that. We mentioned 3 generations coming up from her, which is his mother-in-law, and his father-in-law's mother, and his mother-in-law's mother. Those were the next 3. Those are, again, it's counting that generation itself, and 2 more up, which, because we said 2 more down from her, we're saying 2 more up from her, and the first were 3 down from him. Now, going above the himself, that you can't say, because his mother can never fall for Yibum for him, because his paternal brother is forbidden in Eishes Aviv and his father's wife. So even if let's say it's not his mother, his brother, but that would still be forbidden for his brother to marry. So you would never be able to have a situation of Yibum where it's his mother. So you can't say 3 generations going up. By him, it would be first 3 generations from him coming down, 3 generations from her coming down, and then 3 generations from her coming up. Then, what do we continue after that? Then B'tana Achaisa, then we mention his sister, V'achais Imai, meaning his maternal sister, V'achais Imai, and then his mother's sister. Why those next? Because the Kreve Atzmai. Those are at least blood relatives, more than his daughter-in-law, which is not really his relative, it's just a married relative. It comes from the fact that his son got engaged to that woman. But therefore, first we'll say his sister and his mother's sister. And then the ID B'Isa'af, now once we're talking about prohibition related to siblings, Tanachis Ishta, we mentioned his wife's sister. That's not really a blood relative, his wife's sister. But once we mention his own sisters, or his mother's sister, which are blood relatives, then we mention also his wife's sister. Now, continuing along, the truth is, we should have, the last of the 15 was daughter-in-law. Really, daughter-in-law should have came next. Before what was called the erva of his brother's wife, that he was not alive at that time, as we explained on the previous daf, where Levi was only born after Reuben already passed away, because the Lemishum Korbahu Dasira. In other words, you're telling me the order of the Mishnah was all about who's closer as a relative. Now, when you come to the daughter-in-law and to the Eishes Achav Shlebalamai and to Eishes Achav Me'imai, which is his brother's it's his maternal brother's wife, those are not because of blood relationships that's forbidden to him. So then, by the last three, we really should have said kalasa before Eshes Achav Shlei Balame and before Eshes Achav Me'imai, because kalasa, his daughter-in-law, is more severe because kala is a death penalty of being stoned. So then you should have gone, once you can't go anymore in the order of relationships, you should have gone in the order of severity because you can't say relationships. So why do we say Eshes Achav Me'imai before kalasa? Because since we're mentioning that of siblings, we mentioned his brother's wife when he was not in the world yet, and then because at least that's a sibling. Kalasa is not a sibling. So although really it's not a blood relationship, it's not more severe, but it's still achva, it's still a sibling type of relationship, and therefore we mentioned it first. That concludes that the Gemara's discussion about. Now you can look back in the Mishnah and see why it's the order of those 15 in that order of the Arais. But then we go back to the basic concept that this whole Mishnah in Mesech is really based on. It says the Gemara, interesting deal. Why you open up the Mesech to saying 15 women, you said that they exempt their tzaras from Chalitza Yibum, which sounds like that they don't have to. But if they want to, it sounds like that they could do Yibum. The problem is, listening Eisros. But you should say that it's forbidden, because, most definitely they're forbidden, because if there's no bond for Yibum, then it retains the Isra of Eishesach. So why are you saying Paidrais, the word Eishres would be more appropriate, as Taisa and Rashi both said. That the word Paitra sounds like you don't have to, but it sounds like if you want to, you could. The problem is, you're not. It's forbidden. You're back to the Isser Eishesach. Says the Gemara, I'll tell you why. Itana Eishers, had we said that it's forbidden, I would have said, what's forbidden? Asal Yabim. That you're not allowed to do Yibum, because Yibum is a marriage, it's an intimate relationship. Now, but Chalitza, you wouldn't learn from this, because there's no Isser to do Chalitza. What's Chalitza? Taking off a shoe, spitting? Many people do that. What's being done? So I would have thought to say that but yeah, they have to do chalitza because you can't have a sister-in-law who his brother died without children to go and move on without having chalitza first, because you didn't sever that bond. Kamash Malan, that no, we're saying that if it's an erva, it's even from chalitza. There's no bond over here. There's no zika bond at all. That's why we couldn't say asuris, because the word asuris would sound like that you're not allowed. What are you not allowed to do? Chalitza? Now do chalitza? Well, no, it wouldn't sound like it's going in chalitza. There's no problem about doing chalitza.
Why would I think that chalitza would be allowed? The Mishnah says, so if we would have said it mentions both.
Right. Right, so it says already minachalitza, right? But we would think that it's how could we would think it's going on? Yeah, it's a good question. The Gemara does get into a little bit of discussion from that, but it sounds like that you would only say the isser is on yibum, not on chalitza, because there's no isser on doing chalitza.
What's the point of doing chalitza if you're not?
In other words, you wouldn't say minachalitza yibum. That's what I'm trying to say. It sounds like the Gemara's question is saying, why are you saying paitra? Say oisris. Now, if you said oisris, we would just say oisris, and we would know. But you wouldn't say, you can't say asr on chalitza. That's what the Gemara is saying. And if I said oisris, then I would think you do need to do chalitza, because I can't say oisris on chalitza. So therefore we said poitras to tell you that it's even exempt from not just yibum, but also from chalitza. You don't have to do anything. There's no bond there at all. But it says the Gemara, but listen, asur alachlitz. What do you mean? What you're telling me, which is basically the question that you were saying. You're saying that, I would have thought to say, if I would have said oisris, what do you ask from yibum? That's having an intimate relationship. That's an erva. But chalitza is no. So why didn't you say asur alachlitz? Which is basically your question. If I would have said chamesha nashim oisris, so they're saying mina chalitza me'yibum, so I would know what's going on chalitza too, right? That's what the Gemara is asking. So the Gemara says, but the Gemara answered like what I was saying. He said, what do you mean, my Kavod? What did he do? You can't say isur b'chalitza. It's not appropriate. You could only say patur. I can't say you're not allowed to spit on the floor and take off his shoe. There is no such isur. Which the Gemara says, what do you mean, Allah malay? Why can't you say an isur by chalitza? No, most definitely they would apply. Why? because imato and mechaletzes, because if you say that they could do chalitza, then you're going to come to say the misyabemis, that you can do yibum. So it would make sense to say that we're telling you you're not allowed to do chalitza, because if we let you do chalitza, you might think, oh, there's obviously a yibum, the zika bond over here, and you might come do yibum. So it would be appropriate to say that no, we're not letting you do chalitza, because if we let you, you might think you can do yibum. So the Gemara says, rather the Gemara says the answer. I'll tell you why it says paitros. Let's say the case of tsaras habas. The Mishnah explained that if, let's say, this case here on the right of the graph, you have Reuven and Shimon that are brothers, and Shimon is married to Sarah and to Rivka. Now Sarah is Reuven's daughter. So we said that since there's an exemption from the mitzvah of yibum, there's no yibum bond, so then this Rivka remains with an isser of like as if she's a married woman. I mean, as if she was his brother's wife that had children. That's when we say there's an isser of a tzara of a shalei b'makom mitzvah sharia, like the graph on the left side. That, for example, let's say a random person became his son-in-law, and he has another wife, and he passes away. So that other wife is permitted to the father-in-law. Now that's tzaras bitay, because this is actually Mishnah later on of Yud Gimel that there are 6 arayos that are so severe, more than the 15 Mishnah, that you can never even have a situation of yibum, and that's called shalei b'makom mitzvah. So in that case, this Reuven can marry that Rivka. So mishum hachi tani paitros. That's why we said the terminology of paitros, because had you said Isis, I would have thought to say, and this is a very important lumdis of Masechta Yevamos, I would have thought to say that the daughter would make it forbidden in this graph on the left side that Reuben cannot marry Rivka, and Kabel Chaimer because it's not b'makom mitzvah. Meaning, if when there's a mitzvah of yibum, you tell me, no, Reuben, even though there's a mitzvah of yibum, you're not allowed to marry Rivka. Why? Because she's tzaras erva. Your daughter is married to your brother Shimon, and the co-wife is a tzara of your daughter. Now, if even when there's a mitzvah of yibum, we say, no, sorry, tzaras erva is forbidden. So for sure, shalei b'makom mitzvah, which is what? If someone, his Adam, married his daughter, and he had another wife, the shver, Reuben, cannot marry Rivka. Now, Rivka has nothing to do with Reuben. When Nachshon passes away, I would say that Reuben can't marry Rivka, because she's tzaras erva. She's the co-wife of your daughter. If b'makom mitzvah is aser, shalei b'makom mitzvah should be aser. That's why I had to tell you the word paitros. Because you know what paitros means? Paitros doesn't say that the daughter is activating an isser on her co-wife, on her rival. You know what's just happening? The daughter's just exempting the mitzvah of yibum. This is a lumdis in what we have a lot of this mesechta. That's why Yevamos has this lumda. Everyone's on Daf Beis for the whole winter's month, right? Because the isser remains. The isser of Eishes Ach is as if she has children. And it's because of the isser Eishes Ach that the co-wife is going to be forbidden. But shalei b'makom mitzvah, that on the left side over here in this graph, where there's no isser Eishes Ach, of course the co-wife is going to be permitted. And that's why I have to say paitros, not oisros. Oisros would sound like the daughter, the Erva, is activating an isser on the tzara. Well, if it's activating an isser, for sure shalei b'makom mitzvah to be activated. No, it's paitros. All it does is says there's no mitzvah of yibum. Oh, no mitzvah of yibum, you remain with the isser Eishes Ach. But when it's a random person, a stranger, there's no isser Eishes Ach, they're not remaining with anything. So then, of course, Reuben can marry the tzara of his daughter, can marry that Rivka. And that's why I had to tell you the word paitros, because or else you would think that the tzaras erva shalei b'makom mitzvah would be aser as a kabel chaimer. And that's why I went to say the word paitros, tzaras saying. Now the Gemara continues asking on the wording of the Mishnah. We said that these 50 women, they exempt their tzaras and the tzaras min hachalitza min hayibum. Says Gemara, why do you have to say from chalitza and yibum? Listen to min hayibum lechudei. Just say that exempts them from yibum, because as Rashi points out, the primary mitzvah is anyways to go and consummate the relationship. And I would have known chalitza by default that if you're exempt from yibum, you're exempt from the secondary, which is that of chalitza. Says Gemara, no, if I only said from yibum, I would have said michlitz chalza. No, that she should do chalitza, and this is a theme that you'll see throughout this mesechta, that not always when you don't do yibum does that mean you don't do chalitza. Sometimes we're not going to let you do yibum because of consummating the relationship, but we don't want to totally remove you from the midst of yibum, and therefore I would have thought to say, okay, so big deal, so she's an erva, but there's nothing wrong with doing chalitza, so why don't you do chalitza? There's a mitzvah of yibum. Let's say the mitzvah of yibum, the rice doesn't exempt the mitzvah, let's say, but you can't have a relationship with her because she's an erva. No problem, don't do yibum, do chalitza. That's a way of severing the zika bond which is there, and you have to take care of it. But I would say, okay, but you just don't do yibum because of the exercise custom we're going to see later on in Litzror. So therefore, Kamash Malan, that's why the Mishnah had to tell you that no, since you're exempting the daughter from the zika bond for yibum, she's exempt from chalitza too because of a very important concept we're going to see throughout this Masechta. Kala oila yibum, which Rashi adds the words zika sibum. Whichever woman comes up to having a bond, that's what the zika means, for yibum, for consummating the relationship, then oila chalitza, then she comes up to having a bond for chalitza. But if she's not coming up to have a zika for yibum, she's not going to have a zika of chalitza, which Rashi says a commenter comments on, but he says that whenever we say how do we have throughout the Masechta? We're going to see situations. Oh, she does chalitza, doesn't do yibum. Hello, didn't you tell me a rule? If she has the zika for yibum, she has zika for chalitza, no zika for yibum, no zika for chalitza. How do you ever have, as we'll see throughout the Masechta, chalitza v'zebemes? Says Rashi mishum sveikahu. When you have a suffix, so you have to be machmer both ways. We don't know. So because of that, we can't do yibum, but out of that, we can't let you go. So you got to do chalitza, which you're not doing anything prohibited anyway with doing chalitza. But in general, either it's all or nothing. And therefore, we had to tell you, mina chalitza mina yibum, because or else you would have thought to say, it's only exempt from yibum, but you would require chalitza. Says the Gemara still continues asking this. But listening mina yibum mina chalitza, but the order is what's bothering me, says the Gemara. Why do you say mina chalitza mina yibum? The order should have been the other way around. You should have said yibum first, because that's the primary. Because the pasuk in the Devarim Chafei says, if the man doesn't want to take her, then he does chalitza, which sounds like, but if he wants to do yibum, yibum is first. So why is the order out of order? Why are you saying that mina chalitza mina yibum should be mina chalitza, or ina mina chalitza, or just say at least from the chalitza, because that would infer obviously yibum first. So why are you saying mina chalitza and then mina yibum? Because Abba Shal, the time of Mishnah is going like Abba Shal. That he says later on, the Lamates on the base, mitzvah chalitza kaidemis l'mitzvah yibum. He says the mitzvah chalitza takes precedence over the mitzvah yibum, because Abba Shal says, and this is the common practice today, he says if someone marries his Yevama because she's beautiful or because of the relationship, it's as if he has had relations with an erva, and it's close in his eyes that the child's a mamzer. Because the purpose here is lamitzvah ba'alma. This is not because you like this woman because she finds favor in your eyes. That's like an erva. The whole purpose is to become the mitzvah because l'zeicha the bruda, whatever, that he died without any children. So therefore we prefer chalitza first because we don't consider you on that level of doing yibum. So that's why we say Paitas mina chalitza mina yibum, because it's going like Abba Shal, who he actually says the order would be chalitza first before that of yibum, because most people are not doing it l'shem shemayim. Now the Gemara continues and says, Minyana Dereisha. When we said we opened up the Mishnah, which is the title of this parak, 15 women, Paitus Tzaraseh. So you said a number, which sounds like okay, only 15 and not more. Lamutei, what's it coming to exclude? Uminyana the Seifa, which Rashi says, where do we have the number at the end? Because the end of the Mishnah says, Hade Elu Paitris, these women are Paitris. Sounds like again, Elu sounds like these and not other women. Lamutei, what's it coming to exclude? Which women don't have the halach of our Mishnah that they're going to be paitis to the same It sounds like you're coming to exclude something by saying a number. It says the Gemara number base is a little bit of a technical thing. It's l'ma'ute de Rav u'de Ravasi. What's Rav? Rav says that the tzara of a saita is forbidden. What does that mean? Let's say a man has many wives, and one of the wives was mizana. Now he has other wives, and then he dies without any children. So both of the wives are going to be pater, says Rav, from chalitza and from yibum. So our Mishnah is coming to exclude Rav and say, no, it's not true. The saita, although she's an erva technically, the saita is like forbidden, but that's not going to exempt her co-wives from yibum chalitza. And it's excluding Ravasi. What's Ravasi? Ravasi says that the tzar of an islandess is forbidden. What's an islandess? An islandess is a woman that can't have children. Now, what happens if, let's say, he was married to an ayalness and another woman, and then he dies without any children? So the ayalness herself is not applicable for Yibam, obviously, because you can't have children. The whole point is to have children. So both are going to be exempt, and we learn these teachings later on Daf Yud Beis. We'll see these teachings of Rabbi Ravasi. But one thing is, the Gemara is telling us that the Mishnah is coming to exclude from that, and to tell us that if it's a tzara of a saita or it's a tzara of an ayalness, that you're not going to have this halacha about Mishnah of poitis tzara sensos. And that's why we say we have to tell you the number 2 times, 15, and able to tell you these women will exempt their tzaras. But that of a saita or that of an ayalness, they will not exempt their tzaras from chalitza and yib. So the Gemara says, wait a second, Rav Ravasi, with am I wrong? According to them, you're telling me that that's what the Mishnah is coming to exclude their teachings. According to them, what are we coming to exclude? So it says the Gemara like this: if Rav and Ravasi hold up each other's teachings, so that means say you have to find 2 new ones to exclude because each one holds the other one, and they wouldn't say that's excluded. So chada lemuted tzaras mema'enes, and so therefore one would exclude the tzar of a mema'enes. What is that? So Rashi explains: if let's say his brother had a minor orphan and another wife, and he dies, and the minor orphan does miyun, which we explained already in the previous daf, is a refusal that a minor could do because her condition was only rabbinic, and she does it in the yavam. So the halacha is like this: that woman, that minor, that 10-year-old girl, and her co-wife are forbidden to the yavam. Now, our Mishnah, however, is coming to tell us that even though that they're forbidden on him, but they're not exempt from chalitza, because that prohibition is only rabbinic. As we'll see later on in the parak, although Rashi says because of Gzeira of Tzaras Bitim and Ennis, it seems that really the reason is because it looks like Eishes Achiv. It looks like it's his brother's wife, because technically they were married and the marriage with the minor was only rabbinic. So therefore, what our Mishnah is coming to tell us by saying that this is excluded is that although Tzaras Mema'enes, that they can't do Yibum, but there will still be an obligation of Chalitza. So it's not in the 15 women, because the 15 women, they exempt their tzara min chalitza or min yibum. Ma'enes, if a girl does miyun to the yavam and says, your brother was okay with you, I'm out of here, right? So that's going to be that, now that's already considered as a problem for doing yibum, but you'll still have to do chalitza, because it's not a biblical marriage, and it still looks like Eishes Achiv, so that's excluded. And the second case that's being excluded from the inference of a Mishnah is the co-wife of a divorcee that was remarried. Meaning, if let's say his brother had divorced one of his 2 wives, then she married someone else. Then he was over the Isser in the Torah of taking back a divorced wife after she had already married someone else, and then he dies without any children. So both these women are forbidden to do Yibum. But our Mishnah is coming to tell us from the Miyud, but you're still going to require chalitza. So that's what these 2 wives are excluded of the tzaras mema'enes and tzaras ma'aseh gushasek. That's if Rav and Ravasi both hold of each other. Now, if each one only holds of his own teaching, not of the other ones, then the Chavri one would exclude his other friend's interpretation, that of either the tzaras saita or the ayalness, and then the other one would be tzaras mema'enes, tzaras ma'aseh gushasek, one, because you wouldn't need both, because you would have already one excluded from the other one's teaching. Now, but the Gemara says a very obvious question. According to them, that they hold that it is like all the other arayos, so then why don't you mention the Saita and the ayalness with the other 15? Because you're telling me that it would be poitis tzara sem mitzvah tzara sem. So why is it not listed in number 16 and 17 in the Mishnah? Says the Gemara, because lafisha ina b'tzaras tzara. All the cases in the Mishnah, which, as we already illustrated in the previous stuff, you could say that, then that co-wife, let's say his daughter, was married to his brother, and then he had another wife, Rivka. So you could say that Rivka goes, and to the other brother, and then he does without any children, and that co-wife's co-wife goes and marries the other brother, and then so on and so forth, where the co-wife keeps on affecting the co-wife of that marriage, and then they're all forbidden to that original brother. Now, the reason for that is because it's only ever to this brother, but to the second brother, they're not problematic. And therefore, if the second brother did yibum even to the co-wife, and he has another wife, and then he dies, and now they fall in front of the first brother, it's going to be patra even in the unrelated woman, because she's sarasa of his daughter. Fine. That's for all the 15 cases of our Mishnah. The problem is, regarding these two cases of Rav and Ravasi, the slight and the idleness, you can't say, oh, then the co-wife goes and marries the second brother, and goes to the third brother, and goes to the fourth brother, because all the brothers are forbidden. Because the issue is coming from the marriage of the first husband. Because she's a saito, because she's an idleness. That's no different, one brother or the other. So you couldn't say these two cases. Even though technically it's poitzes tzogah saying, you couldn't say, and tzogah's tzogah saying, and tzogah's saying, you couldn't keep on going because everyone knows none of the brothers could have gone and done evil. So therefore we didn't mention it, and that's why it's not going to exclude our cases. It just couldn't mention it. It's excluding either, like they're saying, tzogah's mema'enis and tzogah's machzik yurushasa. Okay, now the Gemara says, going back to the halach of the Mishnah, to the basic of the source, where do we know that an erva, hartzara, how do we know, as far as it goes, that they're all going to be pater? Where do we find the Torah? They can be pater from chalitza and from yibum. So the Gemara says, we'll learn the brisa. Pasuk says in Yikra, and this is going to take us for the next few blot. It says in the Torah regarding a chais ishtay, regarding a person's sister-in-law, his wife's sister. It says Isha la chais leisikach, a woman with her sister you shouldn't take, litzra to be co-wives, legalis arbasa lebachiyah, to have an intimate relationship with her when his wife is still alive, because it's only forbidden when his wife is still alive. Now the problem is there's an extra word over here. Aleha matam aleimer. In this pasuk, why does he say the word aleha? As Rashi says, you could have simply written legal sarvasa b'chayeha, and you would have known that only when his wife is alive is it forbidden to have the sister, but after death it's permitted. What are you really gaining by the word aleha? Says the Gemara, Lefisha Nemra. This is going to teach us the source. It says in Devarim, we're going to mitzvah yibum. These are psukim. You're going to get confused. You're going to try to figure out which aleha we're talking about. So try to keep track. Just two psukim. They both have the word aleha. One aleha is by a chais ishtay, and one aleha is by this pasuk of Yevamos Yavi aleha, which is the pasuk that talks about yibum, that he should have relations with her. Now, Shemean the afila. So I would understand from this pasuk that even if it falls for yibum, I would say that okay, yibum is, it just says his sister-in-law, which is erva, still is his brother's wife. So any erva would be permitted to do yibum. Oh no, that's why never kan aleha. There's an extra word aleha. And it says over there by yibum aleha, the same word, or to teach you context. Malahan b'makam mitzvah, just like over there when it says the word aleha of Yevami of Yevalau, it's in the situation of a mitzvah. That's what it's talking about, the mitzvah of yibum. And therefore, Afkan, so it must say over here, when it's saying that the prohibition of the sister-in-law, meaning his wife's sister, must be also b'makam mitzvah. The aleha is b'makam mitzvah. You see that the pasuk by yibum is b'makam mitzvah, so it also means b'makam mitzvah? And what's the Torah telling you? You cannot take the wife's sister, as a wife, even if it's b'makam mitzvah yibum. Now, mainly on the here, I would only know the erva of the chais ishtay itself. So, how do I know that his wife's sister's co-wife that's married to his brother is also going to be forbidden? Because Talmud about litzra. In that pasuk of the sister-in-law, it says the word litzra. What do you need the pasuk litzra for? To tell you that even her co-wife is forbidden. Now, mainly on the I would only know her co-wife. But how do we know her co-wife's co-wife? And so on. Litzra, it says in the plural, litzra, lotzor. It's litzra sounds like many tzaras, because it could have said lotzor. Litzra is to say the co-wife's co-wife, and so on and so forth. That's really the main source for right now, that you see that the erva is asa, b'makam mitzvah yibum, and the tzara and the tzara. But then the Gemara says, ve'en le'la chais ishtay. Now I would only know as it applies to a chais ishtay, because that's the erva that we're talking about, that the Allah is telling you is also b'makam mitzvah yibum. Shar Rais Minayin, how do we know other Rais also? I'm going to say this from a comparison. Ma'achis Isha Miyuched is just like the wife's sister is distinct. Shehi Erva, it's an Erva, it's one of the prohibited relationships. V'chayamanos day in the chorus, and you're liable if you do it deliberately chorus, like it says in the term Yuki Yudches, after all the Rais says the Nichrusu and the Fashal Isa that is chorus, and one of them is Achis Ishtay. And Masha Gagas Chatas, we do it by mistake. There's Chatas because anytime there's Zod is chorus, the Shigog is Chatas, like the Gemara says later on the Testament Aleph. And Vasur Liyavam and Tubin to the Yavam. Oh, okay, of course she erva. Then everything that's an erva. Which are all these women that we mentioned in our Mishnah, it's going to be forbidden to the Yavam. So essentially we're learning out all other arayis from Achais Ishtay, which Achais Ishtay we know from Aleha. Now I would only know the arayis themselves. So the same, how do we know that their co-wives also is the same thing like Achais Ishtay? So it says the same logic. I'm going to say, just like the wife's sister is distinct. She erva, again, that she's a prohibited relationship. And you're liable for karas if you do it deliberately. And for chatas if you do it by mistake. Because we learned that from the pasuk of Litzror. Of course, she erva v'chayav the karas. And there's all that criteria. It's also going to be tzara sasur. It's going to have the same halacha of tzara being forbidden. This is where the sages get it by opening up the opening Mishnah Masechet Yevamos. 15 women, as Rashi points out. There are no other women that have an erva as karas, except for 6 other arayos of the next Mishnah, which they don't have ever a situation of being yibum, so we're not mentioning those 6, altogether 21. But these 15 women are pledges to Rasin, they exempt their co-wives, and their co-wives, menachalitzim, the yibum from the mitzachalitzim, yibum, atzay v'olim, no matter how far that goes. Now, you would think maybe I would include also the 6 arayos that are more severe, which they can't even be married to his brother. They would have to be married to other people, meaning, well, it's what's called, like Taisa says, shalei b'malka mitzvah. Meaning there are certain women, we'll see in the next Mishnah, like let's say his mother. His mother cannot be married to his paternal brother, because it's forbidden, because it's his father's wife. Now, his mother is obviously an erva to him. So you would think that those 6 arayos that we'll mention next Mishnah, that that their co-wives would also be forbidden to marry to this person. And Amit, you would say that no. Because, why would you think it would be us? Because it's a tzavas erva. But no, is just like a wife's sister is distinct. That's the source. She erva, it's an erva, v'chayovnas dein karas, and you're liable for deliberately karas, v'sheguras achatas. But v'efshuli nasi la'achem, it's possible for these women to marry his brother. And therefore, basur liyavam, but it's forbidden to the yavam, mitzavas hasur, and the tzar is also going to be forbidden. Av kol she erva, v'chayovnas dein karas, v'sheguras achatas, v'efshuli nasi la'achem. And it's possible to marry to the brother, and basur liyavam is forbidden to the yavam, then tzavas hasur, then the kohav is forbidden. That excludes these more severe 6 arayas. They can't even marry the brother. Therefore, tzarasei mutav is there with their co-wives. Like, a little bit similar, like we said in Oman Aleph, that it's only b'makom mitzvah that we said because what essentially it does is that it just takes away the mitzvah of yibum. So you remain with the issa eshesach. But there was never halacha that the tzalas erva is creating an issa. It's just removing a mitzvah. And therefore, when a co-wife of his mother, who's married to some other person, obviously not his brother, because his brother enemies cannot marry, that co-wife is not going to be forbidden to their son, because tzalas elva is only b'mokum of the mitzvah of yibum that we say removes the mitzvah of yibum, it doesn't create it in isser. And therefore, the tzar is going to be permitted, shein tzar elamach, because the tzar is only from a brother, as Rashi really says this out. He says, since the pasuk is exempting from the zikaban, so it's as if that woman, the co-wife of the erva, remains with the isra of eshesach as if she has children, which are pashma of kars, like it says ervas eshesachicha. But in general, there's no isser of eshesach. It's going to be permitted. That's saga even from a more severe erva of like a mother and things like that. Now the Gemara says, okay, ashara shamanu, you told me the source of the prohibition of an erva in the situation of yibum, einish minayin. How do we know that if, let's say, that he does yibum to the erva or to the tzara, that there's going to be a punishment? Amakra, the pasuk says of a yikra. Pasuk says, Kikol ashayasim akal te'ebes v'goyim, or whoever's going to do from any one of these abominations, the pasuk concludes, etc., that v'nichras hanafal shesaisis mekeravam, there's going to get cars, which includes all iser erva, which includes all these women that they're included in the iser erva, like because we see achais ishte is an erva, even b'makom mitzvahs yibum, which we learned that from Aleha. It's even b'makom mitzvahs yibum, because Aleha said in the mitzvah of yibum, it says Aleha b'achais ishte. And it says litzra to include tzara, and we learn all other eyes from her, and therefore we see that there's going to be a punishment of cars. Now, but the Gemara has a question on the brisa. Sounds like taima the chasav l'achmana aleha. This is really starting the next daf's discussion, which is going to take us a lot more than that. It sounds like that the reason is because you told me it says aleha by achais ishta, and it says aleha by the mitzvah of yibam, and therefore that tells you that an erva is going to be pater, and the tzaras, because it says litzra. Even b'moka mitzvah, halav hachi. Sounds like, okay, if not for this, the Gemara is basically asking on itself. Sounds like if not for this, how do I mean I would have thought to say, that you could do even with the wife's sister. My time, what's the reason? But it means a punishment of karas, or whatever it is. How could you have entertained to say that you need a pasuk allowed to exclude and say you can't? Says the Gemara, well-known concept. That means that we say, asay. The positive command of doing yibum comes along with to say and overrides the negative prohibition of whichever error it is, because as the Gemara is going to explain later on, as we'll see on the next dafim, that we learn from Sukkim that asay is dechalais asay. So I would have thought to say that a positive command overrides the negative prohibition. Says the Gemara, when do you say a positive commandment overrides a negative prohibition? That's just a generic negative prohibition. But let's say shesh because midachi, but a negative prohibition that has cars, you think it's going to be daicha? Who said? Where do you get this idea that can be daicha even let's say that has cars? And moreover, and this is the question we'll end off with, let's say good edim and on the dachi. How do you know this concept of asay decha let's say that you want to say? I would have said asay decha let's say that the mitzvah yibum is going to override the negative prohibition about the erva of achis ishtal whatever it is. Therefore, I need a leha to tell you that no. The pasuk that's saying the prohibition of achis ishtai says the word aleha, which means even when there's yevami of the aleha, you're still going to have the issa of achis ishtai. And then again, all the other rights we learn from achis ishtai. Now you understand why the Gemara asked achis ishtai should come last, because the issa of this mishnah of ours that's talking about these arais you can't do yibum is all learned from achis ishtai. So, what do you mean? Why would I think that you would be able to do yibum if it's an erva? I say dechalese. First of all, how do you know I say dechalese? And who said I say dechalese would even go when there's a license of chorus? Maybe only a generic license say, and not that of chorus. That's what we'll see in the next dafim regarding going through the sugya of say dechalese and how that relates back to even shesh bekaris and back to the sugya of needing a leha to tell you that no, that even so we're not going to let you go ahead and do yibum b'mokam of an error. Thank you to any time for hosting us.